you have to be really intentional about putting a team together.
I was in!
Crawled out of the pile and started screaming.
How good is Joey Bosa?
Herbert, rolling, looking, throwing, end zone, touchdown!
It's intercepted. Derwin James. Derwin was there.
You got to be on a mission every day in the NFL. But even more than that, you got to be on a mission together.
Great hands, Keenan Allen.
The Los Angeles Chargers select Rashawn Slater.
Asante Samuel Jr.
Stop! Oh, I'm stopping y'all boys. That's what I'm
Intercepted, picked up by Michael Davis.
Explosion, explosiveness from Eckler. There's Murphy. Boy, he blew that up, didn't he?
It is picked off. Nasir Adderley. 50-50 ball is 100%. Mike Williams.
Ochena Nwosu. And that will end it.
Time to bolt up.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. Today's show, of course, is being brought to you by UFC Fit in Temecula, Brewery X in Anaheim, and Charger Bolt family. Dan, we're up on our pedestal on Monday. All up in our feelings.
Felt good.
Good thoughts. High energy. You felt it from us. You felt it from the Charger faithful out there. But as one coach famously said, we're on to the next team. And in this case for the Chargers, we're on to Baltimore, because you talk about an absolutely pivotal matchup, not just between two stud quarterbacks also, by the way, that have very good arguments for MVP candidacy, but overall records in the AFC conference in general. I mean, this is huge when we're talking about long-term, down the line, playoff implications. Dan Wolkenstein, it's week 6. Chargers versus the Ravens.
Jake, listeners, welcome to Chargers Unleashed. For those who have not listened or seen this show before, thank you so much and welcome. You can find us at Twitter or at all the social media sites, but on Twitter at LAC_Unleashed. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube and find us wherever you get your podcasts. Yeah, Jake, the energy is up, and it's going to stay up when this team is playing this well. 4-1, leaders atop the AFC and AFC West, going into their last week before a bye week with the opportunity to go 5-1 headed into the bye. What a world are we living in? But what a test do we have ahead of us than to go up against the juggernaut that is the Baltimore Jacksons at this point. Baltimore Ravens are living and breathing by a one Lamar Jackson. And we got so much to talk about this matchup. So obviously, like always, we'll talk about the Chargers offense versus the Ravens defense, and we'll flip it. Talk about the Ravens offense versus the Chargers defense. Of course, we have to go into some key matchups. And Jake, we have a new voicemail today for the Chargers Unleashed hotline that we'll get to later, before we finally get to our bold and game predictions, which I know Jake loves doing. So Jake, on the face value, Chargers versus Ravens in Baltimore, arguably game of the week again with this Chargers team. What's your feeling like with this game? Are you feeling more or less confident than you were against the Browns, the Chiefs? Like, what's your overall sentiment with how this game could look for us?
You know, it's interesting, Dan, because it depends on what you're talking about as far as what to be scared of. Last week, when we were talking about the matchup between the Chargers and the Browns, we talked, what was the biggest story? The obvious thing was the running game, and we saw how that played out against the Chargers defense. I didn't think that we would end up having to be worried, or as worried as we ended up having to be against Baker Mayfield. Now, did Baker Mayfield put on a stellar performance? No, serviceable performance, threw for over 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, but the Chargers defense didn't sack him once. I believe they only got to him on that one pressure that could have been a fumble recovery caused by Derwin James on that great blitz. But outside of that, even with 2 backup tackles that Baker had, Chargers defensive line really did not put that much pressure on them. And then, of course, it was nothing but the David Njoku show as it relates to their passing game. So What am I worried about as it relates to now looking to this week with the Baltimore Ravens? Well, quite clear. It's one Lamar Jackson. Let's keep in mind, everybody, this is not the Lamar Jackson that was essentially baptized by fire by the Chargers a couple years ago in the playoffs. Not anymore. This whole notion of, while Lamar Jackson is obviously still doing amazing things rushing the ball, he is still growing as a passer, and so is this offense. See Hollywood Brown. Look what he just did on Monday night against the Colts and bringing them back from a 19-point deficit. What Lamar Jackson's doing right now for Baltimore's offense, with the lack of weapons that he has, essentially he has no running backs. He is the running back. So what he's doing right now with this team and still having them at 4-1, yes, you could depict all you want as far as teams and records, but we didn't make the schedule. Neither did they. The higher ups did. So they play who they play. Regardless of all of that, he has them winning and in position to be atop the AFC conference right now. So the way that I see this Chargers defense, still you have to go to the rushing game, Dan. Prior to last week, we were 29th in the league in rushing defense. After that fantastic defensive performance against the Cleveland Browns, we are now dead last in rushing yards allowed per game. So that with a mobile quarterback like Lamar Jackson, who has no rushing game but always has the option to take it whenever he wants, break containment, it is such a backbreaker for defenses if you get him into 3rd and long and you allow him to scramble. Justin Herbert did that twice last week for certain things against the Browns when he was able to convert. But Lamar Jackson is literally that dynamic of a weapon and is playing so well right now that defensively, maybe it was a blessing in disguise that you had the worst defensive performance that you've had all season last week, so that you can tighten up the screws, because trust me, you're going to have to when you're going up against number 8 over there in Baltimore.
For folks who have not seen what Lamar Jackson is doing in Baltimore, just look at what your quarterback is doing, number 10 for the Chargers. Like, Lamar Jackson, although a very different style, is as important to his team and has been having as good of a year as Justin Herbert has for the Chargers. So we're going to get into a bunch of this in terms of matchups and offenses versus defenses. But Jake, as we go through this, what I want listeners, and even you, to focus on is, like last week, there were certain things that we were concerned about in terms of like good on opposing teams versus bad versus us. And good versus bad usually is not boding well for us. There's that on both sides in this matchup. So as much as I'm concerned about the Ravens' rushing attack, I'm bullish on the Chargers. And so it's going to be, I wouldn't be surprised if this is another shootout, to be honest, and we'll get into why. So let's start off with the Chargers offense versus the Ravens defense. Jake, they got this guy, Odafe Oweh. For folks who have not seen this guy, he is an absolute game wrecker, and between him and Patrick Queen, like, they're literally wrecking games. I think I'm going to say his name wrong, Odafe Oweh, I believe. Him and Calais Campbell combined have 14 quarterback hits. I'm not talking about Patrick Queen yet. But he also has 2 forced fumbles, 3 sacks, and 3 tackles for a loss, along with, I think it's 7 or 8 combined quarterback hits. The guy is ridiculous. So when we go through kind of comparing these two back and forth, Jake, let's start with the Ravens defense for a sec. Everyone knows, historically, Ravens defense, vaunted, always bringing pressure, lots of blitzing. That is still true. I think they're currently ranked 5th in blitz percentage at over 33% of the time. 5th in pressures, so their blitz is actually working, 28% pressure percentage. And 1st in the NFL in tackles for a loss with 29 in the NFL. 29 so far this season. So, in terms of aggressiveness, they're doing pretty good. Now, this is where I start to kind of lean towards, okay, that sounds great, but this is where I lean towards, okay, but careful what you wish for in terms of aggression, Jake. With those numbers, sounds awesome. They also are 30th in yards per play allowed. They are 28th in passing yards allowed, 30th in yards after the catch, and dead last in missed tackles with 45 on the season. Now, remember that when you look at who they're going up against. Justin Herbert is arguably the best in the NFL going up against pressure, arguably the best on third down. They're number one in total yards on offense with 2,200, third in passing yards, fourth in third down percentage, fourth in QBR, sixth in points. So they pressure a lot. But it's kind of like what happens when you pressure Mahomes. Like, what's the one thing he said? Like, do not blitz him. Justin Herbert is almost kind of becoming that. And so their defense is nasty. It always is. But Justin Herbert takes that all day long. So in terms of like overall offense versus defense, there's a lot of good versus bad. Good Chargers passing attack, bad defense for Ravens. Mm-hmm. Recipe for success there for the Chargers, in my opinion. Rushing, different story. Chargers are middle of the pack, which, to be honest, like that's okay. I think they're 17th in rushing yards and 13th in rushing yards per attempt, which I'll take that. Like that's okay for me. I'm bullish on the Chargers offense going up against Ravens defense on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean and understandably so. I mean they have been hit with injuries on every level of their defense. Most notably Marcus Peters at the very beginning of the season. Derek Wolf's already been on short-term IR. He's supposed to return in week 7. But I mean, they've had some defensive pieces, and even right now, Brandon Williams, their defensive tackle, did not participate in practice today. So, yeah, they've had a lot of injuries throughout their team. And again, it's just more of a testament to what Lamar Jackson has done for this team. You take their overtime loss in week 1 against the Raiders that ended up happening. Again, they come right back, and they come back with a thrilling ending in defeating Kansas City. And then from there, it's been Detroit, Denver, and then obviously what happened in the Monday night game against the Indianapolis Colts, where Lamar Jackson just brought him down 19 points. Nobody could stop him. I mean, can the defense be had? Yes.
And Colts also did not help themselves, but I digress.
No, yes, of course. But if you look at those last three games that they played, Dan, this is much the way that I looked at it when we were breaking down the Browns games. The best quarterback that the Browns had faced before it was Justin Herbert was Patrick Mahomes from week 1. They haven't played a quarterback of that caliber over the last 3 games. So now you bring in Justin Herbert, who, again, feels like he's setting records left and right week by week. And the weapons that you have on offense, and I'm really happy just to see over the last 2 weeks, when you think about the ways that the Chargers have won this game, they've won it in very different fashion. Even go back to week 1, it was a very different fashion. The last 2 weeks, the Mike Williams show this past Sunday against Cleveland. The week before that, it was nothing but the tight ends. Jared Cook, Donald Parham, and Steven Anderson all got them some of that Raiders defense. So you're so well-versed on offense. The way that Jared Cook has everything cooking on all cylinders right now. You mentioned the run game, Austin Eckler. The offensive line is opening up some holes. And if they can continue to do that, and if this offense can stay well-balanced, yes, this defense can be had. But Dan, much like we wouldn't have predicted originally that the Cleveland Browns game against the Chargers was going to be a shootout, to me, this has much more higher potential to end up being a shootout.
I agree.
It truly does. Regardless what you may think about Lamar Jackson and their offense and how they haven't produced in the past, I completely will just respectfully disagree with that, because it has the potential to score points quickly. And with the way that this Chargers defense played last week, you can't help but hold your breath a little bit, especially the way that Mark Andrews has been playing, like Hollywood Brown. Still waiting to see if rookie Rashard Bateman is going to be activated off the short-term injury reserve, and he may make his return. But yeah, from an offensive standpoint for this Chargers team and Justin Herbert taking the helm, there's a lot of different ways that you can figure out how to score points on this defense. And those stats don't lie defensively, Dan. So they're going to have every opportunity to put points up on the board.
I think this has to. I think really this is going to boil down to like which offense can be more successful, and because I don't necessarily know. I'm struggling because we did pretty darn good containing Mahomes. That was with Drew Tranquil, and Lamar Jackson. Like, yes, Mahomes is mobile, but like Lamar Jackson is like him on steroids in terms of mobility. So if the Chargers can, again, contain Lamar Jackson, put a roof over the top, no big plays, and force them to go down 15-play drives, I think we're going to do just fine. Can we do that? Or is this going to turn into the Browns game where we're giving up 70-yard touchdowns on the reg? That's what I'm concerned about. So flipping it, Jake, if we look at kind of the Ravens offense versus the Chargers defense, this is where, like we have on offense versus their defense, they have good offense versus some bad on our defense. And no surprise, you mentioned it, it's all about rushing. Although, the Ravens offense is good with both. They're 7th in total yards, 6th in passing yards, 4th in rushing yards, 7th in rushing yards per attempt. But Jake, again, I mentioned this before, they're only 27th in the NFL in third down percentage. So get them to third down. Again, long, sustainable drives. Get them to third down. Them getting it is less frequently going to happen. The part that is a little concerning is the Chargers, their biggest weakness, Achilles heel, is the rush defense. Interior defensive line, not good. Missed tackles, surprisingly, because of this past week, which you saw like 3,700 of them versus the Browns. They are 27th in missed tackles. Dead last in rushing yards per attempt. And unfortunately, like, they don't have many sacks. Like, Bosa leads the team with 2.5. Otherwise, they have 10 on the season, which is not good. But again, like, their passing defense is pretty darn good. 7th against passing yards allowed. 6th in hurry percentage. 10th in pressure percentage. And the thing that I actually like about this goes back to putting the roof on the top of the offense. Air yards per completion. So how many yards do opposing offenses get through the air without the yard after the catch? They rank second in the NFL, only giving up 104.2 yards per game through the air without yards after the catch. I'll take that, and that's containing and eliminating the big plays. But the crazy part is, like, Lamar Jackson is a single-man wrecking crew. Like, the dude, I think, has like 340 yards rushing, which, in context, that's 8 less than Austin Eckler. Oh, and by the way, he's also a quarterback. Their tight end, Mark Andrews, is a beast, which I love the fact that we have Derwin James for this one. Like, they live and die by the long pass and chunk plays. Lamar Jackson, I think, is second in the league in yards per completion at about 14, I think like 13.6.
First in the lead in total yards when we're talking about passing and rushing, 1,860 yards, both passing and rushing, and we're only in week 6.
The dude's ridiculous. The dude's Superman on offense and literally is doing everything for that team. So if the Chargers can kind of have that same blueprint, Jake, if they can just keep the top on the offense, eliminate the chunk plays, wrap up, obviously, and get them to extend drives, that's a recipe for success. But if they can't contain Lamar Jackson, this game's a wrap, period.
That's what I'm worried about, Dan. If I know, shocker, right? What bothers me, because you mentioned the stat about their third down conversions. Not too impressive, but if we get into a situation where it's 3rd and 4, 3rd and 2, I'm worried, because Lamar doesn't have to worry about passing the ball 4 yards or 2 yards or anything like that. He could drop back quickly, he could go out on a bootleg, and he can get the short yardage conversions and keep the chains moving in that circumstance.
That's how
exactly. And historically, I know we're talking about as you like to say, Dan, a different team, but the trend is, and has been since week 1, that this Chargers run defense is clearly not good, sitting at 32 right now. Historically, what has it been? And you've seen it in spurts. You even go back all the way to the Kansas City game right now. Patrick Mahomes was able to break containment, convert, move the chains, and doing it with his legs. So when you have someone as dynamic as Lamar Jackson is, who's much better with rushing the football, again, very few guys in the league in history can do what they do with the football, both passing and rushing, than Lamar Jackson. Very short list of that.
For those who are a little bit older, remember Michael Vick in his heyday? Like, Lamar Jackson, I think, is better and more dynamic than Michael Vick was at his best. And like, that's saying something, because Michael Vick was special. But Lamar Jackson is a cheat code. I mean, they both were. But I think he's a better talent than Michael Vick.
It's debatable, but it's a good argument that you have behind it. So that would be the short list as far as the guys you've seen doing those type of things with the football. So it's a fair place to put them. And again, this Chargers team, not only rushing defense, but overall containment with a history against mobile quarterbacks has not been the best. Nope. This is your first, second, third, and fourth highest priority in stopping this team. Now, beyond that, Dan, you start looking at the tight ends. You look at Mark Andrews. You look at Hollywood Brown. The potential of not having Drew Tranquil for this game, which is very realistic, has to be worrisome, because you've already been without Kenneth Murray. He's slated to come back after the bye. You take an unfortunate pec injury to Drew Tranquil at the very end of the Cleveland Browns game that thankfully does not look like it's going to be long-term. Dan, you even made a prediction to say that we could potentially see him after the bye week. But this is the type of game that I think that you would need someone of his caliber, because since he's been inserted more into this defense, it's just been a huge boost all the way around. You've seen him coming in on blitzes, creating pressure, just overall looking pretty good in coverage. And, when the run does get to him, he can close in a hurry if he needs to. So now you're going to be asking Kaiser or White, and, who's the next guy up? Is it Nick Neiman that's going to step up into that position? Who's going to be the next guy up that has to step up? I'm sure there's going to be some creative defenses where you're going to be using Derwin James in the middle of the field, because we all know about how multidimensional he is. I'd be really interested to see what type of defensive packages are going to take place here. But overall, if Drew Tranquil is not on the field,
it's tough.
It's going to be tough.
I think to be honest, this is a tougher matchup to me than the Browns game was, in terms of like who we have versus who they have. Like, yeah, the Browns are stacked, but like Lamar Jackson scared me more than anybody on that Browns team. And so this is probably going to sound idiotic, and common sense, but if the Chargers can somehow make someone else beat them, they'll be fine. Like, make Lamar Jackson a pocket passer and go down the field. If they can have the same blueprint they did against Patrick Mahomes, they'll be fine. Do they have the personnel for that with both of their better linebackers out? Probably better linebackers in terms of like sideline to sideline, being able to track a fast quarterback like this. I don't know. This is a tough matchup for me. Not to be the eternal optimist, Jake, but I said this a couple days ago. Worst case scenario, Chargers lose this game, 4-2, entering the bye, able to get healthy, atop the AFC West. Worst case. And if we would have asked for that before the season started, say, hey, that's just fast forward, week 6, 4-2, atop the AFC West, would you take it? 100% of Chargers Twitter would have taken it without playing a game. Then I'm like, yep, I'll take it. Totally. We're playing with house money right now. So I don't see there being much of a negative impact with the loss, as much as I see a huge, monumental, like season-changing perspective if the Chargers can win this game. 5-1, into the bye atop the entire NFL aside from the Cardinals. So, tons on the line, tons of upside. I personally don't see much downside to it, but this game is going to be fireworks. And I can't wait because I think this is probably the first time that we saw Brandon Staley kind of get punched in the mouth defensively. Like, they got whooped last week. And so, like, how is he going to respond defensively against arguably the best offensive player in the NFL right now?
Well, easier said than done, right, Dan? I mean, you're never really going to stop Lamar Jackson, especially against this defense that, again, has had that history of bad containment against mobile quarterbacks. The best you can hope to do is just slow him down. Now, I know everybody's, and I'm not trying to poo-poo Lamar Jackson here as far as what he's done so far in this season. But, you know, everybody's wrapped up in what Lamar Jackson did on Monday, which was fantastic. Obviously, he had his best game of the season, 442 yards, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. But you go back and you look at the rest of these games since the beginning of the season, Dan, none of these, as far as his performance goes, were even close to that level of what he did. I mean, you even look at his performance against Denver, 316 yards, 1 touchdown. Against the Lions, 287 yards, 1 touchdown. Against the Chiefs. Now remember, in dramatic fashion, the Ravens ended up winning. Obviously, causing turnovers was a big part of that for the Ravens. But in that game arguably was his worst game, Dan. He threw for 239, 1 touchdown, and he had 2 interceptions in that game, and they still won.
Against the Chiefs defense, which we know is hot doo-doo right now.
Yes. And then, of course, in week 1 in the overtime game that they ultimately lost against the Raiders, 235, 1 touchdown, no interceptions. So none of these games that he has had has been even close to what he did on Monday against the Colts. So
don't you dare get me excited. Don't you get me more excited now.
I'm not trying to, but can he be slowed down? Yes. But you just have to figure out how to do it because this defense right now, especially coming off of last week's against the Browns, and again, it may be a blessing in disguise given the fact that you won the game in spite of all of your defensive mistakes, but you really have to tighten up the screws. You can't allow these big chunk plays that he was able to get to erase a 19-point deficit like that with Mark Andrews and Hollywood Brown. You can't allow that. So the Chargers secondary is going to have to be better. I hope to God that every defensive player brought out their dictionary and looked up the word tackle and
brought out their dictionary.
Correct that mistake. Yeah, correct that. You know, it's like, oh yeah, that's what that means. Okay, yeah,
that's what a tackle is.
That's what it is. Okay, so, but yeah, Dan, you know, it's just all about overall containment. Lamar Jackson's going to get his, but how much are you going to allow him to get is the big question.
All right, Jake, let's just get into the matchups then. So, in my opinion, when looking at the Chargers defense versus the Ravens offense, the only 2 people I'm looking at for stat lines in terms of what will be indicative for a Chargers victory is Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews. If both of them go off, the chances of the Chargers winning go down drastically. If just one of them go off, I like our chances. Yes, we don't know about Bateman. Hollywood Brown is an unknown. But I think those are the 2 guys by far that make that offense go in terms of like production. I think Mark Andrews leads their team in both receptions and targets. Stop those 2, or at least, contain those 2. I'm talking like for Mark Andrews, if he can get 5 for 60, I'm cool with that. Do that, I think Chargers have a great chance of winning this game. And I guess the other key matchup for me is going to be just the defensive line as a whole, but more specifically, the edge guys keeping containment. Don't let Lamar Jackson go out. It's basically the same thing you talk about with Patrick Mahomes. Don't let him extend the plays. Keep him in the pocket. I'll take my chances. Those are kind of the key matchups for me. Can you contain Lamar Jackson on the outside? And can you limit Mark Andrews? Do those 2 things, Chargers win this game.
I mean, the Mark Andrews one I really like, and when you think about this, look at the tight ends that the Chargers have gone up against over the last 3 weeks. David Njoku, Darren Waller, Travis Kelce. Now, luckily for them, they were able to take Darren Waller out of that Raider game. Only ended up having 50 yards receiving. By his standards, dramatically low.
Yeah, Kelce didn't do much either. He's the same thing.
Well, I mean, he still broke the century mark. You know, he had 115 yards rushing, but we all know, I mean, and he was targeted 13 times in that game. So we know how prolific of a weapon.
He got like 45 of those yards.
Right. Yes, and I got that. And then you look at David Njoku, obviously the biggest home run of all three of these tight ends, 149 yards on 7 targets and 7 receptions. That he was able to get that. So yeah, tight end to me, especially if you look at what we were talking about in Drew Tranquil being out, yeah, over the middle would be a great spot to exploit if I'm the Baltimore Ravens coaches and looking for matchups that are going to be to their advantage. And yes, of course, to the run game, and as you mentioned, to the edge. I'm not so sure what the final result on this is going to be, but Ronnie Stanley has not practiced this week so far with an ankle injury. Alejandro Villanueva has not practiced this week so far with an injury, with a knee injury. So don't know how those stats are going to, or statuses are going to relate come Sunday. Everything could change, obviously. But yeah, the Chargers have to do a better job of, in my opinion, creating interior pressure on Lamar Jackson. I don't think that getting to him off the edge is simply going to be enough to either pressure him or contain him, because he's fast enough to where he can beat anybody that we have on the edge. So you have to get the push up the middle. If you allow him to have any time to relax, dissect the play, see the openings where he can run through, it could be a very long day for this defense once again.
So little, a lot, or none concern for Mike Williams, Nasir Adderley not practicing today. We talked about Drew Tranquil, but those two specifically.
Mike Williams doesn't bother me, considering I think it's more precautionary, because with him, where we saw him being injured 3 plays later, he caught the long pass from Justin Herbert, and he was in for the rest of the game. So I'm not too concerned about that. The Nasir Adderley injury, I haven't heard too much stuff about. I mean, yesterday he was limited in practice. Today, obviously, he didn't practice. It's never a good sign when you start going backwards, especially at this point of the week. But I'm not ready to hit any. Let's just call it mildly curious right now of where.
So you say little concerned at most.
Little at most, yeah.
All right, so Jake, before we get into our bold and key predictions.
Oh, crying out loud.
Or sorry, bold and game predictions. We got a voicemail on the Chargers Unleashed hotline. For those who have not called in or heard how this segment goes, you have a chance to get your voicemails, your takes, your feelings, all good and bad of them, depending on the week you're having. Call into the Chargers Unleashed hotline, 323-374-5651. I will listen. Jake will not until live, and Jake will hear them all for the first time, and we will get Jake's instant reactions as well as mine as we go through. So, Jake, we have one voicemail today before we get into our bold predictions. You ready?
Let's hear it.
All right, so we have somebody calling us from the 540 area code. I believe this is West Virginia. Let's hear what they have to say.
All right.
Hey there, both up. James Wagner, Sam from West Virginia, 52 years old. Love to watch you guys' podcast. I'm a YouTube follower. As a matter of fact, I made a comment right after the Dallas Cowboy game that I believe Staley will be the head coach of the greatest team in Charger history. And I stand by that, and I'm going to even extend that. Based on the geographics and the coaching staffs of their upcoming schedule, I believe that Staley is headed to the Super Bowl. So God bless you guys. Love you guys. Hope the best. and go Bolts.
Let's go, James Wagner. Oh, Jake, let's hear your reaction to this. Yes, please. I'm all popcorn. Go ahead.
First of all, James, thank you so much for calling. For us, reaching you from in West Virginia is truly it's our pleasure. It's our honor. Thank you so much for being a supporter of the show, obviously. But I have to ask right now, Dan Wolkenstein, what is the matter with you? How much did you pay James Wagner to say such comments? All right.
I was gonna say I did not coerce him. That was not me with a really good voiceover. That was someone else, unsolicited, and I love him.
I like how you had mentioned too before you played the message that I will listen to them beforehand. Jake will not, which gives a little bit of suspicion to me. It's just like, okay, did he say everything I wanted him to say? Yeah, okay, he said that. He said that. Okay, yeah, it sounds good. I don't need to have him recorded again.
Vouch for me. Vouch for me.
We mean vouch for you.
No, I was telling James Wagner to vouch for me.
Oh, James. Okay,
yes.
Yeah. Anywho, okay, look, Dan, you said this last week. And you've been saying it now for the last 2 weeks. Your line has been, imagine the euphoria if XYZ happens, okay? And I understand, especially coming off the thrilling win that the Chargers have had or took place against the Cleveland Browns this past week, that everybody's hype right now is to the moon. And I get it. I understand it. And as Dan has clearly pointed out several times, both on this show and privately to me, imagine the euphoria if the Chargers were to go into their bye week with a 5-1 record. The hype around this team would be through the roof. That's Dan Wolkenstein. And he's not wrong when he says that. I get it. But let me tell you something. We all know, everybody should know, no matter what team you root for, the playoffs are a much different animal. So for the team that has struggled to make the playoffs in the first place over the last several years, very few times have the Chargers made the playoffs over the last couple of years. Let's just win the division first. Path one to the playoffs, and ultimately in James's case, to the Super Bowl, is win your division. I'm not ready to pound the table just yet. I'm gonna leave those responsibilities for callers like James, for my co-host Dan Wolkenstein, and for the rest of the Chargers fan base. And trust me when I say, I'm not here to poo-poo on it. I have become as big of a believer in Brandon Staley and what he has done for this team as all of us have. But
it's taken a lot of work to get you to get to this point.
Let's pump the brakes just a little bit. One game at a time, 1 week at a time. If we're looking towards the playoffs, at least right now, we're in a pretty good position. But we got a lot of football left to play.
Okay, Jake, I'm gonna tease this out just so I can kind of get your senses on this. We're not talking Super Bowl yet, but let's say the Chargers go 5-1 or 4-2, whatever. Pick a number. I'm gonna rattle off these teams, and you tell me if this is a win or loss. You ready? Chargers against the Patriots, win or loss?
I think there'll be a little bit of a revenge factor in that one,
win
considering that they got shut out. Yeah, of course it's gonna be a win. Come on, I had to build up a little bit on that one.
Chargers Eagles.
That should be a win.
Chargers Vikings.
Should be a win.
Chargers Steelers.
That should be a win. Okay, let me preface this by saying one of these games that...
Okay, no, I know.
No, hang on a second. This might be the one that has trap game written all over it, if I can say something about this game. Historically, the Steelers have played the Chargers very, very well, and I know everything as far as the look on Ben Roethlisberger right now with his arm and his decline and his age. Something just tells me that type of a game, the way that they play defense and the weapons that they have on offense, trust me, the Chargers have been embarrassed by less. That could be a game that they could lose. So you know what? I'm going to say that there's a real possibility that they could lose that game.
Chargers Broncos.
That should be a win. But
Chargers,
that'll
hold
be
on.
close.
Okay.
That'll be close.
Chargers Bengals.
That'll be entertaining. But a win.
Giants Chargers.
Win.
Chiefs Chargers. Probably a loss, right?
I'll say a loss. It would take a lot for me to start picking the Chargers to beat the Chiefs twice in 1 year.
Chargers Texans.
I was asked this by one of our good friends on one of our joint podcasts in Guilty as Charged, Steve Hagelin. He had asked us a question in our panel interviews as far as what would be the most surprising win and surprising loss of the season. And I said surprising win was actually the Baltimore Ravens. And again, this is before the season even started. I had called this being my most surprising win. The Texans would be my most surprising loss, obviously. And that was me thinking that Tyrod Taylor would be playing up until the point where he plays the Chargers. It would just be poetic justice if Tyrod Taylor were able to somehow beat it. But obviously, doesn't look like that's going to be the case now, given the current situation. But it might be. Who knows? He may return by the time that the Chargers end up playing the Houston Texans. But I'm safe to say that the Chargers will win that game.
Chargers Broncos.
Again, win, but it'll be close.
Chargers Raiders.
It's funny. Every Raiders fan has bookmarked that game, considering what happened just a couple short weeks ago. But this should be another convincing win for the Chargers.
Okay, so Jake, you got to the point that I want to get to. You have just rattled off 9 wins after the bye week. Do the math.
Yeah, I know. But let me just...
13, that's 13 or 14 victories for your Los Angeles Chargers.
Well, Dan.
That Jake Hefner is predicting they win.
Dan, you're saying this... Hang on a second. You're saying this right now.
I'm candy
hang on a
rainbows.
second.
This is wonderful.
You're saying this right now as if you're surprised. The biggest surprise to me is where we're at right now in this stretch of these first 6 games, because we all knew that this was the toughest part of the schedule.
Oh,
and I said if we could get to 4-2 by the time that the bye had rolled around, that we'd be in great shape. Obviously, I did not know that the Chiefs were going to be in the position that they are currently in right now. There are other teams in the AFC that I did not predict them to be in certain situations, namely the Steelers for one. So it doesn't surprise me that much. And yeah, it obviously, when you take the second half of the schedule and you just pigeonhole it the way you did, yes, it's like, oh my God, Jake's just rattling off all these games that the Chargers are going to win. Let me tell you something right now. I've said this numerous times. If you are a betting individual, do not listen to me. Do not follow my predictions. Okay? There have been very few times that I have actually been able to call something right, but do not follow my predictions. Do not bet or wager anything on what I just said, because the Chargers will most likely end up losing more games than I just said that they will win.
Well, speaking of Jake's predictions and not betting on them, let's get to them. Bold and game predictions for this juggernaut of a matchup between the Ravens and the Chargers, Jake. 10 a.m. Pacific time this Sunday. Bold prediction. Lamar Jackson has 3 interceptions. I think the Chargers are going to contain him in the pocket, not contain him as a player, but contain him in the pocket. And I think the Chargers are going to make him go long sustaining drives. He's going to make some mistakes. One of those 3 is going to be a pick 6 or a scuba score.
Oh.
A defensive touchdown's happening. Game prediction. I gotta say, I think I'm 9-1 the last 10 in terms of game predictions here, Jake. So a lot on the line here. I'm gonna go Chargers 34, Ravens 31.
Is this a Tristan Vizcaino last-second field goal that's winning
Hell
this
no.
game for you?
Nope.
I just wanted to make sure because you had that point differential.
Nope.
All right. I know the Ravens are favored by 3, but normally when the home team is favored by 3, it's essentially a pick'em game when it's that close.
I think it's going to be the Ravens having to try to storm back.
Okay.
And Chargers hold them off.
That sounds more realistic. All right. Bold prediction. I don't think that I could come up. I mean, my bold prediction obviously last week had to do with Justin Herbert. He blew my bold prediction out of the water for what I predicted from him. So realistically, anything that I would have to say about Justin Herbert in terms of a bold prediction, it's just not practical anymore because it definitely seems realistic and it's no longer bold. It's just like, well, of course he's going to do that. You could say he could have 500 yards passing, and sure enough, he's probably going to do it. With the
Is it that bold?
Over the last game. Yeah, exactly. Is it really that bold to say such a thing like that? I really like your Lamar Jackson 3 turnovers one. That's bold enough. I don't think it's going to be 3, but I think there's a good possibility that turnovers happen from him for sure. You look at the 3-headed monster right now that's really been consistent for this offense. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler. How would you feel if all 3 of those guys had 80 yards or more and a touchdown apiece?
Ooh. So Austin Eckler, 80 yards receiving or total?
I'm glad you said that. I'll go with 80 yards receiving. Not total. I'll just go with 80 yards receiving, period. 80 yards or more receiving from Austin Eckler, from Keenan Allen, and from Mike Williams, and every single one of them gets a touchdown.
Ooh, I like that. That's juicy. Okay. 3 touchdowns, 80 yards.
Final score prediction. My favorite part of the show.
Moment of truth. Here we go. This is going to be so good. Don't
Again, I think this has more of a potential to be like the outcome we ended up seeing against the Cleveland Browns. I think this has shootout written all over it because both defenses have their weakness. Both offenses can score like that. I think Brandon Staley's game plan, if what he's telling the team, is going to be very similar to what it was against the Chiefs. Maybe much the way it was against the Raiders. Maybe more related to the Chiefs. Just say, we're going to get up on them early. They're going to come back. And we're going to sustain. So with that, I've got Baltimore Ravens 34.
Oh.
Los Angeles Chargers 38.
Jake has another victory in store for the Chargers. How does it feel? I don't think I've ever been on a show with you this many games in where I've heard this many victory predictions. Like all of last season, you didn't have this many.
Well, no, but I mean, again, how many other games did I predict right before you went off on your magical 4-game win streak to end the season? So, I mean, what can I say? I can't go as my pessimism in some circles knows no bounds, but I'm also a realist at the end of the day. And, Dan Wolkenstein, whatever he wants to say about me, as far as me either drinking the Kool-Aid or him converting me or whatever it is, but
it's happened.
No, I'm not going to say that that's fully. I'm just going to say it's getting a little bit better every single week. Okay, I love this run that we're on. I'm happy to see us in the position that we're currently in right now, and I'm not going to be naive and unrealistic to think that the Chargers can't win this game just so I can latch on to my pessimistic reputation. I'm not
as much as you'd like to.
As much as I like to. That's right. Like I said, this feels like a variant universe from Loki. And I don't know what to do with my hands. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's happening, but all of this is different.
But we do know that there's going to be a victor come Sunday afternoon. And we're going to be going into a bye week with the AFC West in hand, regardless. Jake, it's going to be a fun matchup. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. That is going to do it for this episode of Chargers Unleashed. We have all things Chargers versus Ravens ready to go. Key matchups, predictions, statistics, offense versus defense on both sides. Jake, how freaking pumped are we to have Justin Herbert and Brandon Staley leading this team?
Well, you have to be pumped, dude. Balls like Thanos. Balls like Thanos.
4 balls like Thanos between the two of them, right?
I know you got 4th and Staley, already in the works for something special. I want balls like Thanos, That's what I want. See if we can get that printed appropriately, of course. See if we can get that in the works.
Yes, for Jake Hefner, you can find him and his beautiful, luscious beard at Jake T. Hefner.
There's nothing here.
On Twitter. There will be by the time they get to this episode.
Bro, I'm not 80. I'm not Tim Allen in the Santa Claus where I shave in the afternoon and then everything grows back at night. What's wrong with you?
I was being the neighbor from Home Improvement. Over the fence. You can find me at Chargers Homer on Twitter. Of course, you can find us at LAC_Unleashed on Twitter and everywhere you find your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts and everywhere else. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of the afternoon, morning, or night, depending on where you are. Enjoy the weekend, and let's go Bolts. Bolt up, and have a good one.